You may not be surprised to hear that a literal rumor mill of propaganda is constantly shaping public opinion. And while those propagandists see themselves as helpful and benign, their reach and impact on politics, medical matters, so much more literally revolutionizes our society. After all, if you get something to trend, then you make it something seen as true. Renee DiResta studies rumors and propaganda in our digital age. She's the technical research manager at the Stanford Internet Observatory and the author of the new fascinating book, Invisible Rulers, The People Who Turn Lies into Reality. Renee, thanks for joining me. By the way, great title for the book, although I've got to be honest, I can't give you credit for the phrase invisible rulers.
That's true. It dates all the way back to 1929 and Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud.
What's amazing, so much is amazing about the book, but a lot of people, if they pick this up, think, well, I'm reading all about social media. And you make the point in the book, this is not really about social media.
Right. I wanted to write a book about people, right? About us, our role in shaping public opinion, the influencers that we follow, the people that we talk to in our group chats. That was really where I wanted to go with it. I wanted to talk about the way that we contribute to shaping public opinion so actively, and that in engaging on social media, we help create reality for each other.
One of the things I found fascinating is when we think about this, first of all, this is impacting our world from politics to medicine, so many different areas. And, a lot of people think, well, it's the politicians who are making this point. You make it clear in the book, no, it's not the politicians, it's the people behind them.
So one of the things that I think people can see in the political discourse today, let's just use the current American political conversation, right? So much of the conversation about Kamala Harris becoming the Democratic candidate, J.D. Vance becoming the vice presidential nominee, Tim Walz becoming the vice presidential nominee on the other ticket. A lot of what we see, the conversation about these people, comes from the sort of internet meme machine. Our understanding of their character comes from snippets of things that they may have said at one time or another, or in the case of J.D. Vance, things that maybe he never actually said or did at all. But through the act of making those stories and claims go viral, we're individually contributing to shaping opinions about these candidates. So much of that is happening just in how we are processing and creating content online, as opposed to in other media environments, even maybe 10 years ago, where you get a sense of who a candidate is based on a profile or something that you see on the news. So just a completely different way of forming opinions today.
And of course, you write so much about influencers and stuff. What I love, your point there, we all think we're influencers, right? We all think that influencers, they're just us. They just have a few more followers.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing that's so interesting, right? People who see media as being removed from them, right? You are a professional, you are a journalist, you're a person who is actually on TV. Whereas social media, we can all do that, right? We can all post something to Instagram, we can all post it to Twitter. There's no very kind of complicated mechanism needed to go get a job. You just start doing it. And so it's a completely different relationship that people have, because it seems like they're just like us. They're just maybe a little clever, maybe a little prettier, maybe a little better at making content for an algorithm, but they seem just like us. And that is one of the things that makes engaging with influencers feel so much more human, so much more authentic in some ways, so much more personal.
And of course, we all talk about going viral. I think every time I post something, I've gone viral. And you're right about what that means. The reality of it is, we think that, like, if I post something, I go viral. But you make the point, this is not a passive thing.
No, there's a lot of focus on the algorithm, right? The idea that you post something to social media, some magic happens, and then everybody sees it. But that's not what happens at all. It's that you post something to social media, there is an algorithm there. It is always waiting and watching to see what is going to be compelling, but people indicate what is compelling. People provide that initial response. And when enough of us go and kind of reshare content, click the like button, we're communicating something to an algorithm that's then going to promote it further. But we play a very, very active role in deciding what goes viral. We help make that happen. It's not accidental and random at all.
What do you say? The difference between people who say, I'm just giving the people what they want, versus those who actively try to impact our views on social, political, medical issues. You talk about, as an example, the people who put out there that mammograms can cause cancer, that sort of thing. And people just take that as reality. What is the difference between those people? I'm just giving the people what they want.
So sometimes it's entertainment, but one of the things that I think media and journalism people who are professionals or people who are professional health communicators, right? They recognize that their words carry impact, that there is a weight there. People see them as authoritative. They see them as experts. And then there's a sense that they should at least try very hard to be right. One of the things that's interesting about influencers is you'll often see them say, oh, I'm just asking questions. I'm just tossing this out there. I don't really know. I just think. And so there's a little bit of a different sense of responsibility to accuracy or to facts. What you'll see, there was a situation for a while, there was kind of a viral conversation happening on TikTok in which women were talking about birth control. Young women were talking about birth control. And many people have had bad experiences with birth control. Nobody's saying don't talk about it. One of the things that began to happen, though, was the formulation of this idea that birth control is dangerous, that it is harmful. And these things that were not factually accurate were also very much in the conversation. So you want people to be able to express themselves, to speak as they are, to share their opinions. The challenge comes in when a platform is deciding what to curate and what to promote, what to weight in the algorithms that shape what good posts or what posts with engagement make it into people's feeds.
Which can be tough. Renee, let me just, we have only 30 seconds left. I just want to use my last question to say, what suggestions do you have for viewers as we're in this political age now and getting bombarded with stuff? Can you give us a key thing we can do to guard against it?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's that if you feel that if the content is making you feel enraged, or if the content is making you feel like you need to share it to show how terrible some person, candidate, or thing actually is, that's the time when you really need to actually go and check and see if the story or the representation that's out there is accurate. There are a lot of moments where one quick clip makes us feel a certain way and we feel compelled to share it, but those are actually the moments when you really want to be doing the extra work to make sure that that you're, that you've got the real facts.
Right, because we all act rationally. Thank you so much. The book is called Invisible Rulers, The People Who Turn Lies into Reality. For more information, check out social media or ReneeDiResta.com. Thank you, Renee. Appreciate it. We'll be right back.